What is up, everyone? Welcome back to Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayaking podcast. My name is Seth Ashworth, and before we get started with episode 39, a couple of things I wanted to say. First of all, I could not keep this podcast going without support of people on Patreon. Patreon is a crowdfunding platform where you can chip in a couple of dollars, get early access to the podcast, and help keep it running. It helps covers cost of things like hosting fees, which are a barrier to keeping this podcast alive. So I really appreciate the people who already support. And if you want to become one of those people, then you can go over to patreon.com/Seth Ashworth. That's patreon.com/Seth Ashworth. Thing number two, before we get started here, the first 5 minutes of this podcast are somewhat gory. And if you are not okay with people describing how they got injuries and the extent of those injuries, this one will be more challenging for you to listen to. So just keep that in mind as you get into it. And if you are made to feel queasy very easy, then this is maybe one you're going to want to avoid and come back for the next episode of. All right, that's all I've got. Episode 39. Here we go. Welcome back to Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayaking podcast. This week, I'm joined by part-time pro kayaker, full-time ice cream enthusiast, Johnny Chase.
Oh man, that was the best intro I've ever gotten.
Welcome to the show, buddy. Good to be speaking with you. For people who don't know you or want to know more about you than full-time ice cream enthusiast, what can you tell people about yourself?
I'm also a full-time anime enthusiast, so that's probably my other go-to. But I like to kayak, and I love kayaking for probably 11 years and eating ice cream for 25 years now. So a little more experience in the ice cream realm. But so on the podcast and be chatting about kayaking for a little bit.
It is, I've known you for a couple of years. I guess we've kayaked together maybe once or twice in Ecuador, maybe like 5 years ago or 4 years ago. But the reason I wanted to speak to you today, the last podcast I was speaking to Alec Voorhees, and we were kind of shooting the breeze afterwards. And he's like, oh, you should totally we were talking about like mistakes you've made and lessons you've learned from it. And he was like, oh, you should totally speak to Johnny Chase because he broke his ankle recently. And I was like, oh, yeah, I did know he broke his ankle recently. And so I wondered if we could start off by not talking about kayaking, but by talking about how you broke your ankle.
Yeah, for sure. First off, this is my first broken bone that I've ever had. And I always wondered what it would be like, and it's not worth it. So I don't need to wonder anymore. But I actually fell rock climbing in the Grand Tetons, climbing with Eric Boomer and then one of my friends from college, Scotty Meraki. And it was, just like a normal day climbing. It was actually our first day of our climbing trip. We had like a week trip planned in the Tetons and then a week in the Wind River Range. So it was like day one, and we were just doing this climb, and Boomer led it the first time, and it was like a little harder. Like I don't climb very hard, but it was a little harder than I normally would lead. But, being around that guy, he's always so motivating. He's like, you should lead it. And so I decided to try, and I was at like topping out of the route, and was like, got too pumped and was like pretty far above my last piece. And I took like a 30-foot whip, and about 20 feet through my fall, I nicked. And
a whip is a fall, is that correct?
Yeah, a fall. Yeah. So I fell probably like 15 feet, like 10, 15 feet above my last piece in the wall, which is a 0.1 cam. So like super tiny little cam. Which luckily was in a really good spot and held. But about 23 feet through my fall, I clipped my heel on a little ledge and flipped upside down, and then was caught on the rope hanging upside down. And I had this quick moment of like, no, maybe it's not that bad. Like maybe I just sprained my ankle, and I looked up and my foot was maybe 2 inches to the right and turned sideways. Ugh. And I was like, oh no, it's really, really bad. And I like started screaming. It hurt like unbelievably bad. And I got to the ground, and Boomer, the first thing he says to me is, oh, you only broke your ankle? I thought you were actually hurt. Oh, man.
Boomer is such a savage. I definitely am going to line him up to be on here at some point, because his adventures are just like so beyond next level to everyone else. It's crazy.
Everything he does, too. It's not just kayaking or like Arctic expeditions. Like anything he's incredible. But they hauled me off to the hospital, and when I got to the hospital, I realized they told me that I had a tib-fib fracture, and my fibula was like displaced and was pressing out of my skin and almost compound fractured. And I had also dislocated my ankle. And it took 20 minutes to try to realign my foot, and then which they never were able to get my ankle back into place. So my ankle was dislocated for an entire week until I got surgery. Then when I got surgery, they called my girlfriend Ashley to pick me up, and they told her that we knew the injury was really bad, but it was much, much worse than we thought. But she didn't tell me that, and they didn't. I don't think I ever talked to the doctor after the surgery. And I came in for my 1 week post-op checkup, and he like cut my cast off like pretty aggressively, and then I had these like antibiotic strips because I had these really bad fracture blisters. So I had these huge blisters, like blood blisters along my ankle on the inside, and he took this like antibiotic strip off like more slowly than I've ever seen him do anything. And I was like, oh, he's being really considerate. And he stopped and took a deep breath and was like, all right, we don't have to cut your foot off. And I was like, what? And he's like, most people with your injury, you lose your foot. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, so I ended up tearing my skin from my bones and my flesh all through the inside of my foot and on the top of my foot. And he thought all of the skin was going to die. And luckily only like a quarter size piece of skin died. And
so just for a little clarification for people who are following along at home, you went into the hospital thinking you were just getting like a checkup and maybe like out of your cast, or they talk about taking your screws out, and the doctor's worried that you're going to lose your whole foot.
Yeah. So I thought I was going to go into a cast because I was in a splint still. And so the doctor was worried they're going to lose my entire foot. And
that's quite the miscommunication there.
Oh yeah. And he just told me right after, he's like, we decided not to tell you. We didn't want you to stress about it. We wanted you to sleep as much as possible. And so I like almost threw up, and I was like, I need water. I need you to leave. So I like had to sit there for like 20 minutes. And when he came back, he said, I'm still not technically out of the woods. Like I could still get an infection. If I get an infection, gone. Like, yeah. So I got really lucky. Like my skin's really healthy now. I have some like, I've lost some feeling, but yeah, worked out for the best.
I just can't even picture what that must feel like to go into the hospital expecting one thing, and then suddenly your conversation takes the hardest right turn you could even imagine, and you're suddenly talking about a very different outcome. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I was literally about to throw up when I heard him say that. I was like, I can't, like, that's been my worst fear my whole life, is like losing a limb.
So what can we take away here? What are some good lessons learned you've had from this experience so far? Obviously you're not fully back to 100% yet, but you're back to kind of hobbling around instead of just being completely on the couch. What have your takeaways been so far? And what would you tell people in the future? Like what's your learning experience here?
Be more wary of ledges when you're lead climbing. It's okay to like string up climbing routes. Like if you're nervous, like put more gear in than you think you might need, and just kind of like know your limits, and don't let people like boom or pressure you in. Although I don't feel pressure, I felt like I can do it, and I just climbed the route. It's been kind of a weird process for me because I knew that I could climb the route, and I had just climbed the route, and like I knew that there's obviously dangers in lead climbing, and I took a big fall, but I was one move away from putting another piece of gear in. So it was like kind of falling at my next clipping point, which is just always where your biggest falls are going to be. And, but yeah, just like really taking care of your injuries. And I think the hard part for me now is just like the daily grind of like, I have to get up and do my PT every day. And, just like really focusing on the recovery aspect of things and not getting too far ahead of myself, and like, making sure I'm careful from this point on and trying to be back to normal.
Yeah, no doubt. I remember like in 2014, I like tore my ACL and my MCL and my meniscus all at the same time, and I had like 2 surgeries, and I had a not similar experience in that like I knew I wasn't going to lose my leg, but it was similar, and it was like a daily grind of getting up and like doing the physio exercises, like it was my job, like 3 times a day, and doing these extra stretches, and trying to keep that positive mental attitude, which is so daunting, I think, to like try and keep your brain in a positive mindset. And it's so easy. It looks like it's going to be so easy to just let that like negativity slide into your perspective, and you can't let it. Otherwise, you're never going to get better.
Totally. Yeah, and it's been hard to say the least. And anyone who has an injury knows for sure. Like you said, like that's tearing all of those at the same time is not an easy thing. And like it's going to get better, but you don't know when. And like after my surgery, I had like a pretty hard time too. So I had 3 weeks where I wasn't allowed to move. I was only allowed to go from the bed to the couch, and then if I had to go to the bathroom, I could go to the bathroom. But I wasn't allowed to do any upper body movements. I wasn't allowed to move at all because they said I needed everything to focus on my skin healing. So I was just like fully stationary 24 hours a day on the couch with no movement. So then when I came out of that, I was like, they're like, yeah, so you like good to move your upper body. But they only gave me 10 milligram Norco for my pain, which didn't end up being enough. So I was in like screaming pain most of the time. And my heart rate was like, I just had like a Garmin watch, and my heart rate would go to like 175 when I'm laying on the couch because I'm in so much pain.
That's like where my max heart rate usually is, like right around there.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah, I'm just freaking out. And so I had like it was like 2 months before I felt like I could even like get up and move. And then, like when that hit, they were like we went from, are we going to put you in another cast or not? And my bones, actually my fibula is still not healed, and it's been 3.5 months. Because my bones broke, when they put them back together, they didn't just, they weren't like, normally there's like a jigsaw puzzle and you kind of slide them back together, but my bones had like kind of disintegrated apart. And so they were put back together gaps. So I had like full gaps between my bones where they had just removed a bunch of my bone that was destroyed. So my fibula is still healing, and it's been a long process. And once my foot was actually casted downward, so like my toes were pointed down, which shrunk my Achilles tendon. So I've been having a lot of problems with mobility and trying to regain my mobility and doing a lot of stretching and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's good to hear you're on the up and up, but it's definitely a sobering reminder to everybody that like whatever outdoor sport you're pursuing, whether it's like climbing or kayaking or anything, literally, skiing, snow, whatever it is, like it's, even though you think, oh yeah, you're not going that hard, it doesn't take that much to put you in a pretty serious spot where it's going to take you a long time to come back to where you are.
Totally. I think the main lesson that I would take away from this, and something I already knew, but just like reinforced it, was I got really lucky that I got hurt. Like, it took me 40 minutes to an hour to get to the car from where I got hurt, and that we were planning on doing, alpine trips in the Tetons, and that you need to have like an in-reach or a spot or something where if you break your leg, kayaking, mountain biking, and you're out there, that you need to be able to get help. Like, if I would have been in the Grand Teton without an in-reach, I don't know what would have happened,
Yeah, I think
no safety stuff.
Kayakers especially, but I think people generally are way too loose about their communication plans for how they're going to get out of a situation.
Yeah, definitely.
That's my experience so far, at least, is you never think you need it, and you're like, oh, whatever, and then that one time you do need it, it's going to pay for itself pretty quickly.
Definitely, yeah, instantly.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about some kayaking then. For people who are not followers of Johnny Chase, where did you grow up? How did you start kayaking? What's your home run?
Yeah, so I grew up in Kernville, California, in the Southern Sierra, and I started kayaking like my freshman year of high school, and I got super lucky like that, having Evan there to teach me how to kayak, who was already paddling, and I think he was in 8th grade. He's a year or a grade younger, so he was in 8th grade.
So you're just breaking up for a second there, Jonny. Who did you have there with you?
Oh, I had my friend Evan Moore there with me. If that helps. You there, Seth?
Sorry, you're just breaking up again, buddy. Try one more time. You had your friend Evan.
Yep, that should be a little better. I had Evan Moore there with me, who was already kayaking in class 5. And we were in 8th grade. He was in 8th grade and I was a freshman. And so he was already a really skilled paddler, and his dad taught me how to roll. And then Evan took me out basically after that and took me under his wing. And I don't think that I had a conventional way of learning how to kayak. Evan, he would take me down runs, and after I learned how to roll, he would be like, all right, if you can roll, you're not allowed to swim, or you're not allowed to come kayaking with us anymore. And so he like played that pretty heavily to heart. And so I would do this run, and I would flip over like in the second wave of the rapid, and I'd run the entire rapid upside down, and I'd roll up at the bottom, and he'd be like, let's go. And he would just like keep charging away down the river. And, he didn't look back much when he was a kid. So it was just on me to like make sure I didn't swim. And he never taught me how to paddle. We never caught any eddies. And we always actually started in play boats, which I think is also funny. But yeah, it was always just, let's just keep going. Just go down the river, paddle as hard as you can down the middle, and don't swim. It's kind of the way I was brought up.
That's definitely a very interesting methodology for teaching. I mean, I guess it's paid off for you. I don't know if it would pay off for every single individual.
Yeah. It kind of paid off for me. I had some, it was good. Like, it was nice to have him like push me, and like, it kind of, I feel like that's carried over into my kayaking today, where I'm able, like, sometimes I get really, you get really scared and you really want to do something. And I'm like, well, if I did it, back then I didn't even know how to kayak. Like, I know how to kayak now. I can definitely do this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's if you look back at what you're doing, and it's like, oh yeah, like blah blah blah, I used to just do this, without really knowing what I was doing. This should be fine. There's some transferability there of skills, right? Of like mental attitude skills. I'm struggling to find the words right now to describe it, but that definitely has a transferability, right?
Yeah, totally. It's like you kind of like a bank of memories. Like, well, I did this back then. Like, I could definitely do this now, and like, not that carries over the best all the time. And you definitely want to make sure you have the skill to do things. And I think Evan and I were in this kind of environment when we were young, where it was like we had some really good mentors when we started kayaking, and then as we kind of got onto our own, we were just like on our own paddling. So when we were like, 17, it was just Evan and I like paddling what we wanted to paddle and doing what we wanted to do and doing our trips, just me and him. And so we kind of got into like, well, we can just do whatever, we feel like is possible. And, looking back, at 16-year-old Jonny, I ran some things that were outrageous, and I'd probably still be nervous to run today, but it worked out. And, now I've got a more level head on my shoulders about what I should do and shouldn't do, and what I can do and can't do.
So you and Evan and Carson and Dane went to Pakistan the year before last, right?
Yep.
How do you think that like mindset of like just don't swim helped you out there? Because that seems like one of the places where it's so big and so crazy, and like even Dane is taking swims, and Dane never swims. So how did that translate for you? Like, did that put more pressure on you? Did it take pressure off? Like, what was the situation out there, or like, how did you feel?
Yeah. I mean, to me, there shouldn't be pressure when you go kayaking, but like everyone talks about the Indus and like being the hardest run there is right now for at least big water. And, the rapids are huge, and you definitely don't want to swim. There's a couple places where it's okay to swim, and luckily where those were Dane swam both times. And there's definitely places you don't want to swim. And yeah, you kind of have to like know that you're willing to fight until the end on the Indus. And I think that, growing up with that mentality that you're not going to swim, you're going to hold on as long as possible, and you're going to do whatever it takes to stay in your boat at the bottom of the rapid, is the mentality you absolutely have to have going to the Indus. There's not really like any room for any other mentality. But also, I think the pressure that's put on the Indus is more that everyone counts their portages on the Indus, and so you want to go there and like make a name for yourself. You want to do less portages, and I think that's where a lot of the Indus pressure came from. Is like you don't want to think about that, or sometimes about those kind of things, but when you're like, oh well, on you'll only portage 6 times, well Sven portage 2 times, and and then they're like, well Dane only portage once. Like, how many times did you portage? Is I think where a lot of the Indus pressure comes from when you're going to the river. And then when you get to the river, like that doesn't hold true anymore, because the rapids are so big that you're like, there's no pressure to run anything. Like, you could portage 15 or 16 times and still run the biggest rapids you've ever run in your life. Or you could be Dane and portage 1 time and one of the biggest rapids you've ever run in your life. So like it kind of goes away when you get there, and I don't think there was any pressure on the river to be anything more than you just wanted to be or were when you were there. Just the rapids are too big.
Yeah, I think not enough people. I was saying, I think it came up when I was talking to Alec, but I said someone a long time ago told me like you don't have to run everything, and that's really sat with me a lot through my kayaking career. And it's interesting to hear. You're basically arrived at the same conclusion, but like only after you got to the river, not like in the build up phase. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like, oh, you've got to try and have as few portages as possible. But then when it comes down to it, it's like, oh, whatever, you don't have to run everything. Like,
yeah, totally. And it was cool. Like, sometimes it's hard to watch your friends run something you want to run, but maybe don't feel comfortable to run. But on the Indus, it was like cool to watch. It was exciting for us to watch like Dane run things and like not have the need to want to run them. Like I didn't want to run the Lupa at all. Like that was not in my cards. And it's cool to be able to watch your friends do things that are like still on the next level.
What were you thinking? Like, where were you sitting when Dane ran that rapid?
I was below the rapid, so I was. I took a photo taking photos from the bottom, and then also setting safety in the eddy. I was kind of like in the neutral spot right there, and like looking at it. It very much was like, yeah, you could run that right there. And there's no way I'm going to do it. And Dane, though, he got out of his boat in the eddy and within like 5 seconds gave us a thumbs up that he's going to do it. Like no hesitation.
Yeah. I mean, I think the more, for me at least, I've experienced like the more experience you have, the quicker you're making those like yes, no's. And you're like looking at things and all the like computations of like, where you're going to go and what could possibly happen and what you're going to do. It happens so much quicker and quicker and quicker. I don't know if you experience this, but like the more rivers you run, the more rapids you like get out your boat, look at, all the variables get calculated, like kind of in the, like the other part of your brain that is not active. It's just like, it's happening without your control. And it's like, yeah, you know the answer when it comes out immediately. And I think for Dane, he's got so much extra time of that like computational, like look, understand everything that's happening, and then decide, like right there, he knows.
No, I mean, he would do, he is, like you said, so much experience, and he can look at any rapid and almost instantly know if it's even possible ever in a kayak, and if it is, that he can probably do it. And he definitely helped a lot on the Indus. Just like, I just think this one memory is Dane was in the back and I think Evan or Carson was up front and we all like pull into this eddy and Dane's kind of like one eddy up from us and, he can't hear anything. So we're like talking about like, all we can see is like this big water exploding everywhere down below. You can't see anything. And we're like, oh yeah, like we should, one of us should probably pop out and scout here and just kind of chatting about what we're going to do. And Dane just hits the eddy we're in. Gives us one look, turns around, peels out, and starts going. And we're like, well, I guess Dane thinks it's fine. And sure enough, he's just like right on line, right where he's supposed to be through the whole thing.
Yeah, I think it's just if you paddle 300 days a year since you were like an infant child, like since you were 7, like you'd have more experience than people the same age as you who have only been paddling 200 days a year since they were 18.
Totally. Yeah.
It's just at some point it's just a numbers game, but I'm curious to know where the tipping point is for like what the number is you have to get to of like rapids run and scouts done and mistakes made before you feel like that.
Yeah, I wonder the same thing all the time because I keep wondering when I'm going to get there. Like, when am I going to be like Dane?
One day. Let's talk about, so talking about Pakistan, is there any notable mistakes that you made either on or off the river on that trip that you learned a lesson from? And what was the lesson?
Everything in Pakistan actually went like amazingly smooth. Everything was, we had a tour service, like we went with Golden Peaks and they were incredible to us. And our Shaba, our guide, he just like took care of everything and everything was really good. They took care of food for us so we didn't get sick. Dane and I got maybe a little sick on like the last 2 days after we paddled. I think the only thing we underestimated was we were there for 2 weeks and we only kayaked the Indus, which we kayaked in 5 days. And the rest of our time was spent driving because our flights were canceled. And so like our flights being canceled, we weren't really expecting, to drive from Islamabad to Skardu, and then from Skardu back to Islamabad. And that was like, on the way there, it was really awesome to see like the country and like go through all these different parts and see how the people live there. And we drove through, a bunch of really cool places and saw really cool things. But on the way back, we were, haggard and we wanted to paddle more, and we kind of got our trip, like we wanted to do some other rivers around the area and weren't able to because we had to drive, the horrendous drive back in a not very like comfortable van.
How did you like train and prepare for that trip? I remember speaking to Benny last year on a podcast, and he was saying that he was feeling the difference of his body like at the altitude. And like things were harder, like portaging was harder, scouting was harder, his heartbeat was higher all the time. Did you put in any like special work to be ready to go on that trip, or is Benny just being a big baby?
No, he's not being a big baby at all. Well, maybe a little bit, but we actually, so Evan and I were completely, I think Carson too, were completely off the couch kayaking. We haven't kayaked since August, so we went to India for a month before we went to the Indus. And so training, and then we went to Meghalaya, India, which is just a bunch of big water, like river running big water runs that, when we got there, we definitely were not in the Indus shape. And I would like walk in a lot of rapids I would normally run and just didn't feel like I could paddle and fell off. And then by the end of our India trip, we ran this river called the Kinchi twice, which is this incredible, like one of my top 5 favorite runs I've ever done, river, big river running, like high volume rapids. And that definitely put us in shape and put us in the mindset. Like there are definitely scary rapids on that run that put us in the mindset to be like, all right, like we can run hard rapids. We're all in really good paddling shape. We all feel really healthy and really strong. And then that's when we went to Pakistan. Like I definitely could not go to Pakistan without paddling some sort of big water beforehand.
So that was like your build up preparation really. Was that like in India, go kayaking in India for what, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month?
Yeah, a month.
So you get a month in India, and then you go to Pakistan and get your 5 days on the biggest whitewater you've ever seen.
Yep, exactly.
All right, get some. So if you want to go to Pakistan, that's the move.
That's definitely the move. There's not any other way too. Like all the rapids on video are way smaller than they are in person. So don't let it fool you.
I believe it. I think for a lot of people, they don't. It takes them a long time before they get that experience of like when you see something and it looks really big on the GoPro, it's enormous. And when you see something that looks really small on the GoPro, you're like, oh, this is so big. But then when you see it in real life, you're like, is it though? And yeah. I think a lot of people don't find that like middle ground spot where they suddenly have comprehension for a bit into their paddling career, and they're suddenly like, oh, wow, that's a lot bigger than where I'm at right now.
No, totally. And I've never done this to Keen. But Evan, Carson have, and I think Dane has. No, Dane hasn't, but
I don't think
Carson
Dane has.
And Evan said that the Stikine is basically class 4 compared to the Indus.
Wow.
So just for like a stepping stone of, what the big water world there,
Wow. Wow. I'm still just.
And I can easily say from running the cataracts, I could run the cataracts up to like 5,500 and the current, and the Indus is harder and bigger for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like everyone who goes there comes back and they're like, that's the biggest I've ever seen in my whole life. And yeah, it's, I don't know, it's crazy. Okay, so that's good. That's like the preparation. That's kind of what I talk about. Lessons learned. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about. Do you have any other good misadventure lessons learned stories that we haven't talked about? Alec gave us this incredible rundown yesterday of this like Stikine shuttle car crash epic that he was involved in. Do you have a similar story that you wanted to share with us?
I do. It's not similar, but I do have a mishap that happened this year as well. I was going into Dinky in May this year, and I got bit by a rattlesnake at the put-in on my foot.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, we were hiking down, and, for people who haven't done Dinky, it's like maybe a 3 mile hike down a mountain basically. And it's like really steep to get down in there. And we were probably 200, 300 yards from put in. And I just felt this really bad pain in my foot and jumped back. And I never saw a snake, and heard like a little noise, but Evan was like walking past a tree behind me. So I just thought it was that. And I was like, oh man, my foot hurts really bad. I thought I'd kicked a stick. And so I like go sit down, and after like 5 minutes, my foot is hurting like maybe 10 times worse. And I was like, man, this really sucks. Like I'm gonna take my shoe off. And I had this one little like prick right above my second toe on my right foot, and it was like blood like kind of pouring out of it. And I was like, man, I must have kicked a stick really hard. After like 5 more minutes, I was like, no, I got bit by a rattlesnake. And
Oh my gosh.
Carson and Evan were with me, and then this other guy, Josh. And they're like, no, you didn't get bit by a rattlesnake. We didn't even see it. Like, no. And I was like, all right, well, let's get to put in. Like, it hurts really bad. Like, let's just get to put in where it's open. Like, I don't think I can't hike up the hill. So, like, walking down the put in, I started like, I was limping really bad and hurting really bad and like hurt more and more and more. And I got down to put in, and my heart rate had gone up to like 120. And I'm like laying on this rock trying to relax, and I start kind of like shaking a little bit, and I take my shoe off, and there's like black around a bite mark, and my foot is just completely blown up. And I was like, oh my God, Carson's like, you got bit by a rattlesnake. I was like, I told you guys I got bit by a rattlesnake. Yeah, so I'm like, I don't know what to do now. Like, I don't know what's going to happen to me, you know? So we're sitting there, and we're like, all right, we could like call a helicopter. And I was like, well, I can still walk. And we had a shuttle driver though, so like the car's gone from the top, and I was like, I can't walk good enough to hike out. And I was
wait, sorry, you've been hiking already for 3 hours?
No, sorry, probably like an hour.
An hour, okay.
Yeah, 45 minutes an hour, but just like down a really steep mountain. Like it's really, really steep down. And I'm like, I don't think I can like hike back up there. And Carson's like, Carson just carries this like little like Swiftwater rescue first aid book in his bag all the time. So he pulls it out, and he's like, oh, look, rattlesnakes. Like, okay, what's going to happen? You could go into shock. Like, you could start vomiting after 30 minutes. And I was like, okay, well, let's wait until it's been 30 minutes, and then we'll see if I start vomiting, and we'll make a decision. And so we're sitting there, and like my foot's getting worse, but like I'm pretty fine, and I'm like not throwing up. And I was like, all right, guys, like, do we need to call a helicopter now? And we're like, we're not in a place where a helicopter could land, and I don't have helicopter insurance, so it's like, you know, really expensive. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. Like, let's go down like a mile, and there's a place a helicopter can land. So we like kind of start paddling down. We start paddling down river, and I'm doing okay at this point. Like, my foot hurts really bad, and I'm like pale and kind of shaking. And there's like one portage before you get down to like a place a helicopter could land. And we get to the portage, and I'm like full blown shaking, like can't hardly stand up anymore, like white, flushed. And the portage is like fairly complicated, and it's short, but like technical. And I get down there, and they help me through the portage. And then like the next rapid's like fairly scary, and run the next rapid. I'm like, all right, like it's fine. Like, I'm just going to do this. And we just like trucked through the whole run as quickly as possible after that. I was like, screw the helicopter. Like, we're just getting out. We just like paddled and didn't scout anything, and just like got to take out and drove myself to the hospital. And I spent 3 days in the hospital after that.
I am lost for words at this point to hear that you not only got bit by a rattlesnake, but then just powered through instead of like taking the exit.
Yeah, I felt I was kayaking really well the whole time. Like, I couldn't really walk. And like the portages on Dinky are really, really short. So like everyone would just carry my boat for me and like kind of like shoulder me through. And so I was like never throwing up, and I like my foot was in like extraordinarily bad pain the whole time, but I was like still nailing every line and every rapid. And I just like, you know, I was like, if I feel like I'm blundering at all, like we'll just pull over and get a helicopter. And I was like, but I always felt good in my kayak, and I was like, I can keep kayaking. Like, I felt better in my kayak than I was. And then by the end of the run, like I couldn't put any pressure on my foot at all, or like move my toes anymore. But I had this weird experience like during the run, like kind of middle of the run, I like was just walking by myself, and I had my boat on my shoulder because I was like, I wanted to like do everything myself, and I don't like particularly like getting help from people all the time. And I was like, yeah, I'll just shoulder my boat down this like 10-step, like 20-step little path right here. And I was in so much pain from walking that it like knocked all my symptoms out. So I wasn't in shock. I wasn't like sweating. I wasn't like feeling weird. I just felt normal and in a lot of pain. And I was like, well, if I'm just in a lot of pain, I can definitely kayak.
You might be the luckiest unlucky person I know.
I feel the same way.
I like, there's nothing I'm trying to put my finger on like a lesson we could take away here, or like a quality that is like something people can train and take away from this. And I'm like, I don't know that I could put my finger on something like the people can take away from this and be like, yeah, well, it's fine. You know, it's like this guy is the like, you know, that we started off talking about your broken ankle climbing injury, whereas like yeah, you could have lost your whole foot, and you're probably going to be fine eventually. And then it's like,
Yeah.
oh, and by the way, I got bit by a rattlesnake, and then went kayaking on Hard Glass 5 in High Sierras, California for a whole day.
Yep. Yeah.
Like, I want to take away a quality here that is, useful, that people can work on in the future to help improve. But I don't know what it is, except for being like really, really, really lucky.
I think the quality that I would take away from it is the only way I was able to like do both of these, like, I think be okay in both the times and know that I'm going to be okay, is I was with people that I really trusted. Like on DP, I'm with Evan and Carson, like I trust them more than I trust anyone else in the world, and Alec, of course. But, I trust them more than I trust anyone else. And I knew that any moment they would do anything they could to help me if something happened. And, at any point in time, like they were there for me. They were always like monitoring me. They were always checking in on me. And like, being with and Boomer and Scotty and, like, I don't know Boomer that well, but I trust Boomer with my life, and so like being around these people that I trust in my life was the only way I was able to like do these things and like be out there and be able to push myself and like do something that may seem scary to other people, but like I know I can do it and they know what I can do. And if they think I can do it and I know I can do it, then I know I can do it.
Well, there we go. That's what we had to dig away at to get there, but you've got to choose who you go on adventures with.
Definitely.
That's the takeaway here, is you want to be careful about who you're going on missions with.
Yeah.
I knew there'd be something. I knew we'd talk about it eventually, and we'd get to what the takeaway was, so that people can be like, this guy's just got a horseshoe tucked firmly between his buttocks. But the real horseshoe is the people who you surround yourself with.
Definitely. And I think it's the same thing with like talking about the Indus, like I wouldn't have gone to the Indus with very many people, and the people I went with were, part of the handful of people I would have gone with.
Yeah, I think your Indus crew would be a choice, select group of people to go with.
Yeah, and I think it says a lot that Dane didn't go with Brendan and Adrian, but did go with us. Just want to put that out there.
I think there was some visa issues the first time.
I don't think that's what it was. I'm just gonna pretend that's not what it was.
Okay. All right,
he didn't trust them. I'm just kidding. Those guys are great.
No dog in this fight, so I'm staying out of this one. But, all right, Jonny, this has been a pretty good podcast. I think we've got some good takeaways. People to pick their paddling partners carefully, or as carefully as they're able to. Is there anything else you want to leave people with before we wrap this one up?
I think that's pretty much it.
Jonny, where can people follow you on the gram, on Facebook, etc.?
Yeah, I'm on J Chase Kayak is my Instagram, and then just Johnny Chase on Facebook. I post most of my stuff to Instagram, so that's where you can find me.
Doing it for the gram. All right, Jonny, thank you so much. It's been a question you ever thought to ask. What's Kayaking podcast. We will see you on the next one. Peace.